come closer to the fire. The panhandle keeps its hours in straight lines, fence lines, highways, telephone poles that measure the wind. A mile outside Amarillo, a small motor court faces the service road like an old dog that still hears the gate. Inside its office sits a register with blunt pages and a stub of pencil. For 50 years, that book has written the same name most nights, whether the rooms were full, empty, or condemned by the weather. This is not a tale about hauntings. It is a plain account of hospitality that outlived its owners, and of a traveler who learned why a motel would keep one room for someone who never checked out.
This story belongs to an auditor from the state comptroller's office, a woman who had seen more metal desks and coffee-stained receipts than most people see, and who read small towns by their filing cabinets. Her name was Ruth Delgado. She covered a circuit from Wichita Falls to Tucumcari, following sales tax trails for seasonal businesses that forgot to be precise. Amarillo was a routine stop. The motel on the frontage road was not. It kept appearing in her spreadsheets like a thumb pressed under the page. Low income, steady utilities, and occupancy forms stamped on time with the same tidy math. None of that would have mattered if not for a column she noticed by accident. The office door opened to a bell that did not ring so much as agree. Behind the counter sat a blotter, a brass rack for postcards nobody bought, and a guest book that should have been a prop. The register dated back to the year the interstate finished rerouting vacationers. On a slow afternoon, she asked to see it. The owner slid it forward with the ease of someone who had practiced that motion. The paper was heavy and dented by decades of handwriting. Room numbers ran down the left. The right held totals that rarely lied. In the center, there was a name repeated in a nearly unbroken column, stretching back half a century. The handwriting changed hands every few years. The name did not. The initial was always a simple E, the surname a plain word that fit a mailbox, the ink different, but the spacing faithful. The room beside it remained consistent, even when the building renumbered after a renovation. On nights the weather shut the highway, the name appeared early. On nights the lot sat empty, the name appeared near midnight. The sums at the end of each page counted towels and taxes. The name counted something else. She ran her finger down the years and watched owners come and go at the margins. Phone numbers crossed out, logos updated, the accountant replaced. But the guest remained, reliably present, as if being present were a job. A motel registers more than people. Roof tar counts summers, grout counts shoes, the ice machine counts mercy. On the Amarillo property, the wind kept a list no one could read. Ruth walked the row in late afternoon heat and saw what a book could not. Room 12's curtain was always drawn an inch left of the others. The threshold bore a clean spot that came from a habit rather than a mop. Even when the lot was empty, the air outside that door felt slightly cooler, as if someone took a breath every so often and returned it carefully. She watched housekeeping work a steady circuit. Every other door changed posture as carts passed. A wedge of light appeared, a soft thud closed it again. Room 12 opened on its own schedule. Linens went in and came out with the rhythm of a long appointment. Sometimes a towel was hung to dry on the shower rail before the cart reached it, and the attendant put it back in place without surprise. The way a nurse restores an occupied bed and records nothing more dramatic than normal. At the office, the owner gave her the folder auditors expect: permits, a boiler inspection, a stack of occupancy tax returns with numbers that lined up more obediently than most motels could manage. The electricity usage did not dip on weeks the lot was empty. The ice machine clicked on regardless of bookings. A neon vacancy sign lit the same way every night, as if it remembered the highway before the bypass and still hoped. The books behaved. The building suggested a ritual deeper than behavior. She requested older ledgers. They arrived from a back room that smelled of cardboard and a particular adhesive that stapled Panhandle summers into paper. The earliest book began in 1969, the year the roofline in the photographs still showed optimism. The E. Mason signature appeared on the third line of the first week, stayed for a run of nights, and then settled into a pattern that tightened as time passed. It became the evening's punctuation, arriving at the same hand-tired moment when an owner thinks about locking the office and instead counts keys. Ruth checked county records during lunch at a library where the microfilm reader still wore its plastic cover like a shawl. The Amarillo Globe's notices lined up in ordinary ways: fairs, rodeo results, an unkind storm season. But one short article reported a collision west of town in the spring of 1970. A man with that surname had been listed missing after a sedan left the shoulder and found a pasture fence at an angle the highway could not forgive. The reporter summarized the search: a weather front, and the name of a ranch that opened gates to volunteers. The update a week later offered no closure, only gratitude for assistance, and a line promising any personal effects found would be returned to family. There were no obituaries by that name locally. A few years later, a classified ran with a motel's phone number in small type, asking any E. Mason to contact the office regarding a held item. The item was never named. The line appeared twice more that decade, and once in the early 1990s, set smaller each time. The register in the office ignored the newspaper's silence and continued to perform its duty. A name at night, a room that learned to be ready without being instructed out loud. Motels outlive their owners by repeating the steps. A couple buys the property from another couple, changes the sign, keeps the detergent, and learns the quirks the first storm teaches. Ruth traced those handoffs across the ledger margins. A new stamp appeared here, a different sales tax number there, a telephone exchange aging from letters to numerals. The handwriting of the E. Mason line adapted to each era without losing spacing. Whoever penned it learned a slope and kept it, as if the name instructed the hand. Maintenance reports in a box under the counter made the tradition more practical. Room 12's air conditioner had been serviced more often than any other, even when occupancy records showed it rarely booked. The water heater in that run of rooms had a habit of warming early. The night clerk notes, written for insurance, not storytelling, described standard disturbances and all the ways tired people forget their cars have alarms. Nothing odd made the pages. Only the constancy of small care did. When Ruth asked for vendor invoices, the owner passed her a slim pile and a reminder that most of the work was done by relatives or cash and carry. A paper taped inside the office supply cupboard listed items that should never run out: coffee packets, batteries for door locks, small soaps, ledger paper. At the bottom, someone had added an extra line in ballpoint ink that had oxidized to a darker brown than the rest. The line instructed that one room must remain quietly available after dark, regardless of forecasts. The note did not name the room. The housekeeping schedule already knew which one. An auditor does not write what she cannot defend. Ruth tested what could be measured. She compared nightly meter readings to reported occupancy and found a steady uplift during weeks the books showed emptiness. She matched it against weather and discoverable variables. The room in question carried the difference the way a musician carries time when the drummer stops. She stayed on site to remove speculation. In that motel, a hard chair sat next to the office door, trained to face an empty pool and a sky with no intention of helping. She watched the lot till late and wrote down what the building did with and without people. Around 11, a pickup rolled in, let the engine rest, and left again. A family from somewhere east used the ice machine as if it owed them for the day. When midnight leaned on the property, the neon sign kept its faint red rectangle steady across the glass. Room 12's curtain moved the inch she had come to expect. Nothing theatrical, only a private adjustment that marks occupancy more than footsteps do. Near 12:30, the owner emerged with a small tray and set it on the office counter. A pencil, the ledger, and a square of paper towels he used as a blotter. He wrote the column's name, drew a line through the rate field, and wrote nothing in the payment box. He then closed the book, reached for the night latch, let it slide halfway, and returned to the chair to watch the road for a few minutes longer. The ritual concluded without comment. The room did not make a sound. The parking lot accepted the entry as if asphalt balances books too. The panhandle experiments with weather like a bored genius. In late May, a storm peeled the motel's roof 30 feet along the southern edge and made the local news between footage of overturned grain trucks. The city inspector posted a bright notice on the office door. Rooms near the break were patched, the rest closed. Power was cut for 3 nights on that side of the property. An orange cord snaked from the office into a room that wasn't supposed to be drawing current, and the owner placed a generator behind the soda machine to discourage questions. Ruth arrived the next week out of sequence, summoned by a polite email asking whether amended returns would be required if the business closed for repairs. The notice sat on the door like a decision somebody else should make. The office was open. The phone worked. The ledger lay on the counter, and the nights since the storm carried entries that matched the weeks before it, indistinguishable in tone and spacing. The name had not missed. The generator sat silent again. Power had been restored. On the day the contractors cut out drywall in the ruined rooms, Ruth stood at the threshold of 12 and looked in without crossing. The bed was made tighter than policy required. The bathroom door stood ajar to the exact degree familiar from other afternoons. A small glass on the vanity carried a ring of water at its base that could have been an old mark or a new habit. The air had the cool of a unit that cycles a few minutes longer than a timer demands. Nothing in the scene would give comfort to a storyteller hungry for theater. Everything in it satisfied an auditor who respects that not all line items intend to be explained. That evening, she filed a note with her office. She wrote that the business met the statute as to occupancy records and taxes due. She wrote that a manual tradition appeared to govern one room's preparation beyond practical booking. She did not draw conclusions about cause. She did not assign words she had not measured. She pinned a copy of the maintenance line to the back of the file. Keep one room quietly available after dark, and left the explanation column blank because the answer had already chosen its ledger. Years pass on frontage roads by teaching buildings to adopt the weather they face. Owners change, carpets surrender, and registers fill and get boxed in closets with mice-proof lids. Ruth retired before the motel did. She returned once as a traveler without a per diem, choosing Amarillo not for charm, but for the clean rectangle a map draws around the idea of a middle. She parked by the emptiest room and sat for a while before going in. The office had been repainted a brighter color, and the postcards now advertised a canyon an hour south. But the bell agreed with its duty, and the counter still welcomed elbows with patience. The owner was younger and carried the look of someone who bought optimism and debt in the same envelope. The utilities were current, the ice machine had been replaced, the sign had learned LED. The register had surrendered to a thinner book with reinforcement rings, but the column with the same name continued, written with a hand that had adopted the spacing faithfully. The rate field bore a dash. The payment box remained empty. The room number stood where it had always stood, even though the building had been renumbered again. The housekeeping schedule on the back office wall coded the room with a small dot rather than a line, a quiet instruction to prepare it last and best. Ruth sat in her car that evening and watched the property do what it had learned. Around midnight, the office light softened the way older bulbs do in late hours, and the lot became less a space for machines and more a sketch of people who had been there. She saw the curtain shift its inch. She saw the office door settle on the chain with the careful shrug of a person who knows one more task will arrive and chooses to be ready. The highway kept its distant verse. The panhandle sky, always more roof than ceiling, kept its refusals. Long after, when the motel finally gave itself to a newer roofline and a franchise with breakfast, the ledger went to a box at the county museum where volunteers cataloged it by weight and date. A typed card explained nothing except the facts. A roadside motel, a half-century of service, a column that honored a guest named E. Mason most nights. Visitors flipped to their birth years and wedding weeks and found the name present like a witness who doesn't need to be sworn in. At the bottom of one page, a paperclip held an auditor's card, its ink softened by time. On the back, in a precise hand, sat a single, defendable observation. Name recorded, room prepared, consideration received. No total was listed. The book did not require one. I stood there myself, years later, and read enough to understand why Ruth drove off that last night, calmer than she had arrived. An honest ledger does not explain. It testifies. The motel had kept a promise longer than its sign, and the town had allowed it because good towns do the arithmetic of mercy quietly. No one proved who E. Mason was, or whether he ever carried a key. The rooms loved the weather, and the weather loved the ritual, and the ritual paid the bills in a currency that did not need banks. If a traveler needed shelter on a night, the rest of the map forgot them. There was a light, a clean bed, and a column that said, present. That was enough accounting for a place that faced the wind.
Some businesses earn by the transaction, a few earn by the vow. Out past the Amarillo exits, a motel taught itself to keep one room for whoever couldn't say their name yet, and it wrote a name anyway so the door would know to open. The ledger is boxed now, its page is quiet, but the math holds. When a place chooses to stay, it subtracts a little loneliness from the road. If you pass a light like that, give it a nod. Not everything that welcomes you needs proof you arrived.